Hello, I'm Holly Hennessy, Principal Analyst at Omdia, covering IoT and OT cybersecurity. And welcome back to our video series on OT cybersecurity. I'm joined by Dan Cartmill from TX1 Networks. Dan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Thanks for having me back. Dan Cartmill, I'm the Senior Director of Global Product Marketing at TX1. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. There's a hot debate, a hot topic issue on visibility versus prevention. Taking action versus being more passive, if you will. It's a valid discussion to be had, but from what we're seeing and the changes that we're seeing kind of the market go through, I'm not so sure anymore that it is one or the other, that an organization would take one and then perhaps naturally progress into the other. It more seems like running both in parallel makes good sense, where they can both exist at the same time. And that comes down to the view of the risk within the environment. So, for example, understanding all of the assets that exist and being able to map out all of the assets, understand all of the vulnerabilities that may exist there so you can come up with tailored plans. Yes, that's of course positive to do, but it takes time to do that. And depending on different equipment and access to sites, the ability to do those kind of scans, it may take even longer if you can't access them at a particular time. What we're starting to see is taking a prevention as well approach. So in almost every organization, every manufacturing industrial site, there's going to be a mix of legacy and modern. And even if it's only modern, it might not all be patched up to the very latest patch. So there's always going to be some level of vulnerability there. From a risk management perspective, we can make the assumption that risk does exist, therefore action can be taken. So, and there's places where it is safe to do this kind of thing. It might be at the IT-OT border, for example, the network border. It could be just at the edges where remote access comes into the OT DMZ, for example. Putting controls in place, so that might be a network control, a firewall or an IPS, something like that. Put that in place in a blocking posture with the policy in there to prevent well-known threats. So it's a generalized policy, sure, and that's not the most effective, but by doing that, you've effectively reduced the risk that is likely to exist. And then running concurrently with the visibility work, increasing the understanding of the assets will then help you move from that generalized to the specific. So you can tune that policy. You can put controls closer to the assets with more specific policies. And overall, that allows you to take action right away to reduce that risk profile, but also improve that iteratively over time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that's something that, I've been seeing a lot more in my research as well, is more of kind of a prevention approach. And I think, when you're looking at IT security technologies as well, and you talk about kind of preventative controls, it seems like that's something that, it's all kind of been there, done that type thing. But in the OT space, it's a bit different, like this is sensible. It's something that, it can work. And as you said, it alleviates a lot of those issues when it comes to time and reducing risk in a faster manner. And I definitely do agree that they kind of work in tandem. I think, often visibility is spoken about as almost kind of the be all and end all of, IoT security or perhaps OT security. It's definitely key. It's important, as you mentioned, it's a sensible thing to do as well. But yeah, I do kind of see visibility as part of that puzzle. On its own, it's not. It's kind of what you do with that information, that insight, and thinking about it is just a load of data that you have on that environment, and then it's what you do next and how you kind of use that visibility to then reduce risk, I think is really important. And kind of those tandem approaches can help with the overall main goal of keeping the operations running and available, and utilizing what technology you have there to kind of meet that goal. I think so. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it just popped into my mind again, an analogy that I've loved using as IT security teams approached the OT world. So if we kind of cast our mind back a little bit, IT security, it's a pretty well-defined domain, generally speaking. There's set approaches on how do we do things, how do we solve particular challenges. When cloud computing emerged, the skill sets, the knowledge, the methodologies and approaches were transferred into how do we do this in cloud. And a lot of the times they worked for the most part. There needed to be some changes, and of course, a lot more improvements have been made since then. But for the most part, the methodologies and approaches and technologies were somewhat transferable between the two domains. So now, as OT security is doing the same thing, and IoT security is doing the same thing, we have that same situation is emerging. And what's often being done is similar from the on-premise environment into the cloud. The approaches, the methodologies, and the mindset is being transferred into OT, but it's leading to adverse effects, leading to bad outcomes, using the wrong tools, or tools that are not suitable, or policies in them that aren't suitable, that are causing impacts. And it's not that anyone's trying to do the wrong thing. It's how we go about solving problems, right? We use what we know. Again, that comes back to the collaboration point, understanding those differences, but understanding that it's not going to be the same as it was going from on-premise to the cloud. It is going to be considerably different as this new domain continues to emerge on how do you effectively protect it. So working together, working closely with those teams will help you bridge that knowledge gap and help you complete the understanding that you need to effectively approach the security problem, both tactically, short term, but also looking at it strategically. Because what we have here is the opportunity to do better than what we've done in the past. IT security hasn't always been done well. Some could say that perhaps it's not being done as well as it could be right now. There's still so many breaches happening all the time. There's a lot to be learned, a lot of lessons learned from what happens in IT in the past, what happens in cloud environments now. We can take those lessons and do a better job. And this early in IoT, industrial security's life, if you will, it really is an opportunity for all of us to take those lessons and do a much better job to foster good security, have it built in from the very start, and really get some great outcomes that help the business.
Yeah, Sean, I think that's a really nice, positive way of looking at it as well. I mean, it is an opportunity, as you said, to kind of get to a better position. And it is, fresh and new as opposed to IT security. And there are challenges, but it's kind of, a nice way to look at things, I think. So, yeah, I definitely like that point of view. And on that kind of, IT and OT collaboration and aligning with kind of operational needs, I think a thing that we kind of haven't perhaps touched on so much is kind of who's responsible for the security side of things. It could be someone from OT, it could be someone from IT. And I think for both, it's kind of making sure that, if you are from the OT side, that's great because you may have a more contextual, awareness of the environment, but it still kind of works both ways. It's kind of, if you are then responsible for a portion of cybersecurity in general, you still need to be collaborating with IT to understand, where the gaps might be there or where kind of, things might be transferred. So from kind of a leadership point of view, how do you think that leadership can kind of encourage and foster this kind of collaboration within OT organizations?
Yeah, so it certainly starts with setting up things like workshops. So, and of course, they have to be done within the confines of the organization. It's unlikely that the third shift is going to be able to come in on their time off to have lunch with the IT teams. It's not going to happen. So finding out the best way to do it inside of your organization, but get the teams in the same room together. So start setting that up, start that knowledge transfer. So perhaps that could be doing interviews with different folks in different departments and providing that in an email out to the wider organization of their perspective on a particular problem, and then ask that same question to people in different departments and send it out to everyone, just to start broadening that general knowledge. Then continue to develop that into the working groups, into this is the problem we're looking at, improving our security for these reasons, and start getting and collecting that input. From a leadership perspective, it takes some humility for the executive in charge of security, if that's the CIO or the CISO, for example, to acknowledge that whilst I'm a security expert, of course, I'm not an expert necessarily in the operation and how it works and its restrictions. And that's okay. As the decision maker, you don't necessarily need to have that wider body of knowledge that would allow you to go and be a site manager, right? That may not be an appropriate skill set to have. The important part is going to be building that relationship with those individual manufacturing industrial leaders, so they can be effective consultants to you to help you make your best decisions. How does each side view the problems that we're facing, and what is the actual objective we're trying to achieve here, and making sure that's well aligned? Once we have that alignment, once that starts to develop, we see these relationships really start to develop as well, and that trust increases between the different stakeholders, between the different teams. That's when we start getting some really effective results.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the other things to kind of think about as well is when you're kind of implementing technology and security tools and things like this, they're not necessarily only going to have security benefits. A lot of the specialist tools in the space, in the OT security market, do have benefits for, both operations and for security. So, I already mentioned kind of the vast amount of data that a lot of these tools kind of collect, and various kind of ways you can analyze that data internally, and you can use it to your kind of, to your benefit, whether that's, it might be useful information on maintenance, or, when might be the best time to go and do patches or things like that. And I think, there definitely are kind of ways in which you can communicate kind of towards that shared goal, and hey, this new thing that I'm going to put in place is actually going to help both of us because of XYZ. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are as well on how you can kind of communicate that, how these security tools can help both sides.
Yeah, so and again, that's in that knowledge sharing, understanding what are the current, and it's not because it's current because there's always going to be something happening. It's either happening now or it's planned. Optimization that's going on within that particular site or plant. That's obviously a key KPI is optimization and reduction of waste. So what are those activities that are already going on, and how can a security tool potentially help with those? Say it reduces special process variations. So if we look at that from TX1's technology, to use that as a quick example, inside of the Edge IPS, it's able to map specific traffic patterns, so the individual protocols and whatnot, that would allow the actual device itself to make sure that only authorized controllers are talking to actual field devices, field units, actuators, pumps, whatever. So by making sure that only the specified controller can send those commands, it helps the integrity, that supports the integrity of the operation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is a really good example there, because the idea of that all kind of being done automatically is just saving time, it's helping with that efficiency. So yeah, there definitely are ways that these tools can help both sides. And I think it also helps as well if you're the person that's responsible for actually getting the budget for these security tools, being able to kind of understand the benefits across all stakeholders and kind of communicate that up higher. It can help with securing budget and kind of those challenges as well that are often faced by decision makers.
Absolutely, yeah. Help to move away from that just hard to shake view that security is a cost center, and really effectively move it into, this is a part of our overall profit generation centers, which of course in many of these organizations, their plants are, they're their core revenue generation centers. Being a part of that and supporting that, making it more efficient, that's golden. Getting in that line is your fast track for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. But one of the things that I always find really interesting from my research is that when you ask kind of decision makers, what they want from their cybersecurity technology in OT environments, it's not security functions that you might necessarily think of that you might get in an IT security response. It's actually all these things, as you mentioned. It's kind of those operational goals. They're actually up there as the number one requirements for cybersecurity technology. And realistically, cybersecurity is meant to support the business. That's what it's there for. So it's definitely kind of a good way of looking at it, I think. It's been a really great chat, and kind of nice to hear some of your examples and experience as well on the topic. So I kind of want to get your view, and I can touch on this afterwards, on, as the kind of OT security market changes and grows, and we've touched on it a little bit with kind of prevention. But what do you think that organizations should be focusing on in terms of, trends, innovations, staying ahead of those risks that are evolving?
Yeah, so the most important advice, master the basics. So there's always going to be the next trend, the next shiny object that comes out that is being touted as this is the biggest threat you have to worry about yesterday, or this is the newest technology that if you don't have implemented, you're seconds away from being breached. That may be true in some of those cases, but even when it is, if you're trying to implement that new technology, but you're building on an unstable foundation where you don't have the most basic cyber hygiene in place, you don't have super basic ones like things like a password policy, making sure that it's not the default password on your devices. If you don't have that kind of thing in place, then the most advanced technology still isn't going to save you. Because, and we see this in a lot of breach reporting, the method of entry wasn't the most advanced thing that ever came. It was taking advantage of something very basic. The challenge with that, I guess, is it's not very sexy to do the basic cyber hygiene, right? When you can be looking at all these new whiz bang tools. But that is the recommendation that I'd give, is focus and master those basics, because the value that you'll get out of that for your organization will be huge compared to the projects that will come after it even.
Definitely agree with you as that being kind of the number one step to kind of focus on. And I think it kind of ties into one of the things that, I was thinking about. And I think it's really kind of understanding the actual attack surface within your organization. As you kind of mentioned, it might just be a password issue or something like this that ends up being a kind of weak spot. And I think that's another thing to clarify. It's not just in general. Of course, it is incredibly useful to understand your type of organization and the types of things that can happen. But it's really kind of ensuring that, you're working with the wider team, as we mentioned, stakeholders, to kind of really understand what could viably be an issue and what gaps you need to focus on first in order to kind of reduce that risk effectively. Even things, as you mentioned, like misconfigurations and things like this, which can be easy wins once you kind of work those out and kind of fix those.
Absolutely agree. Yeah. And the extra part of that on there is take the first step, start. That's so critically important with that. Is we could gather more data forever, but at some point we have to start. And there is never a better time than right now. If you haven't started already, start now. And that is almost always something very basic, and it can be something very safe within the operation as well. You don't necessarily have to do something that risks outages, but it's important to get started.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that point there. And I think what you touched on there, it doesn't necessarily have to be something, that has any kind of risk to the operation itself. I think that's something that kind of often comes up when you're talking about OT cybersecurity. On one of the biggest worries is for organizations that when we kind of do this research is that they're concerned that cybersecurity is actually going to have an impact on the performance of the device. And,
right.
And it's valid. But yeah, so I think that's one thing to kind of also mention is that, it doesn't have to do that. There's a lot of this technology that might be out there that it's going to have a more active role or, have a bit more autonomy. It can go at your pace, once you're kind of on that journey and you're gradually moving through these, to basic, to becoming more advanced. these things can move with you. So it's kind of not something to be kind of apprehensive about. And as long as you're, selecting the right technology that can support the environment and is specialized for that environment, I think it's a kind of a good thing to aspire towards.
Absolutely. And a critical point I'd add to that, there's different kinds of controls. So looking at this with that risk management lens, implementing a different technology or solution, that's a technical control. There is also the entire suite of admin controls, administrative controls. And a lot of those need to be done before you make a decision, because they'll help you inform the decision you may make on a technical control. It'll help you understand what does that piece of technology, that solution, need to be able to do. So the example of that is we have this exposure, this risk that exists. Implement these various administrative controls. So it could be things like a password policy, or having things in place that stop certain, or that only allow certain folks to access that area. So it could be door locks and things like that that are in place, and other kind of physical controls that exist outside of cybersecurity. By putting all of those in place, the residual risk, the risk that now needs to be mitigated with a cybersecurity solution, may be much, much smaller. So then when you're looking at what solution can help with that, it can really help you narrow down the list, help you make your best decision. So it's not always about jumping to solutions first. There's a whole lot of a majority amount, I would probably say, that can be done without needing a technical solution. By going through that process, it's really going to help you make your best decisions for those residual risks that do require a technical control or solution to effectively mitigate.
That's very valuable information for sure. And I definitely think that's a good way to go. So thank you, Dan. It's been really great to have you and learn from your experience and kind of delve into the topics we've discussed today. And to everybody listening, I hope this was useful and you've got some, starting points and an insight into where to go when developing your OT cybersecurity strategy. And yeah, look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ollie. I appreciate it.